Hey, wanted to make a video about a documentary titled The Money Masters. Now, The Money Masters, I'm not sure when it was made. I think in the mid or late 90s, and it's a pretty popular, at least on the internet, documentary about the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking. And I have to credit this documentary with getting me interested in economics. Way back in 2003, 2004, I was politically about where I am today, but I really didn't think about economics. I didn't care too much about it. I didn't know anything about Austrian economics. The only thing I really knew is I had seen a documentary on PBS titled Commanding Heights, which is it's kind of a Hayek versus Keynes slash Friedman versus Keynes debate. It's not a bad documentary, although I think now it's a straw man against Mises because he's barely mentioned. But anyway, I saw this documentary on a conspiracy theory radio channel called RBN, the Republic Broadcasting Network, which I believe is still a network. And way back then they had a site with a whole bunch of videos on it. Of course, they were 9/11 documentaries and Illuminati conspiracies and all that sort of stuff. And they had this one, and it was called The Money Masters. And it looked boring to me, and so I watched all the other ones first. And then one day I was really bored, and I thought, okay, I'll watch it. And I was pretty much blown away. It's basically a fairly decent history of the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking in general, going back to the practice of Goldsmith taking money. And even though it's a fairly old documentary, I think it's important because a lot of people seem to have watched it. And a lot of times watching YouTube, I will see people who I can just tell that they watch this documentary because of the arguments that they make. And the reason I'm making this review, it's not really a full review, it's a kind of a synopsis slash critique, is that although the history in it is okay, although there are some problems with that, the economics in it and the prescriptions that they come up with, namely that rather than fractional reserve banking, the government should simply print money, out of thin air, completely fiat money on its own, is extremely bad. And this is emblematic of a divide that does exist in the, I guess what you would say, the anti-Fed or the anti-central banking movement. There's kind of two sides to that. There are a lot of people who are against the Fed, and they want either a gold standard, or increasingly a lot of those people want basically free market in money. And then there's another side that thinks that the government should simply have 100% control, and that Congress should simply issue notes. And these would be I don't know, I want to call them monetarists, but I think that would be bad because that term has other meanings. And there have been a couple popular books. Apparently there's a book titled Web of Debt that took this and that approach, and Money Masters definitely does as well. Now, Money Masters, I think it's like a 3-hour documentary. If you watch it, I'm sure you can find it online. I'm not going to look for it now. It used to be on Google Video. It's probably on YouTube as well. And its history, as far as the Fed in particular is concerned, is pretty good. However, they do make some mistakes. For instance, they talk about colonial script, and they make it sound like colonial script was, the best thing ever. Colonial script was not the best thing ever. There was rampant inflation in colonial script, and it was invented to finance aggressive warfare. The first time it was ever used, and some people claim this is the first time fiat money was ever used in Western society. It was used in China long before. It was in Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 90s. It might have been before. And what happened was, back then, the Canadian colony in Quebec was far smaller than the American colonies. It always was, but for the first 50 years, the colony in Quebec was minuscule. And Massachusetts would basically, every couple of years, attack Quebec and steal a whole, they'd burn Quebec City or Montreal, and then they'd steal a whole bunch of supplies, and they'd come back. And that's how they paid the soldiers. The soldiers would go, and they'd get booty from the raid, and that's how they got paid. Well, one year they lost. They attacked, and they were defeated, and they came back empty-handed, and soldiers wanted payment, and so the puritanical theocrats who ran Massachusetts Bay came up with the great idea of just issuing paper that they said at some point they would redeem, although there was no promise as to when, and that, with the customary promise that we'll never, this is okay because we'll never issue any more. And of course, they ended up issuing a lot more, and I think pretty much before the American Revolution, almost all the colonies had started doing this, and almost all of them had really bad inflation, and then the British government outlawed the practice. Now, they make it sound like colonial script was great, and they'll quote Benjamin Franklin. However, as smart as Benjamin Franklin was, and as wise as he was in other matters, he's hardly the right person to quote here, because he was responsible for printing a lot of this paper. So this would be, I'm sure we could find quotes from Thomas Biddle or Ben Bernanke about how great the Fed is, but how could we really take those seriously? They work for, well, Thomas Biddle wouldn't say the Fed, he would have been the second bank of the United States, but we could hardly take their statements at face value, and this would apply to anything Ben Franklin had to say about colonial script. It's a glaring omission that they would characterize it as this wonderful thing. And now, they also ignore other historical examples. The Chinese, of course, also attempted to do this, and they eventually gave up after about 100 years of attempting to make it work, because it doesn't work. Also, during the French Revolution, the French government issued first assignats and then mandats, which is basically unbacked currency, and of course, these inflated to nothing, and they had to institute the death penalty to make people use it. Not just to use it, they instituted the death penalty for people asking how you were going to pay, because if you were going to pay with one of these fiat notes, they charge you more than if you were going to pay with silver or something. So that is a problem with the history. But as far as the history of the Fed goes, it's pretty good. They all know all about Jekyll Island, and they'll quote the various Treasury secretaries and whatever. There's a lot of quotes in it, which is always good. Now, I think it's important, though, because this whole, the government should just print the money straight up, has to end. All right, people need to realize that that's not an answer, and here's why. Like, people get really hung up on this. The central bank is bad because it's debt-based currency, and that's true. But when it comes right down to it, the way that affects you and me is that the value of our dollar goes down. The state doesn't have any mechanism to assign that debt to any particular person. And so the only practical way that affects you is that the government will monetize its debts, which will lower the value of the currency. There'll be inflation. You'll lose purchasing power. That's the problem with the debt-based situation. That's the effect it has on the rest of us. If you have a government that can simply just issue bills, that same effect can happen, and historically will happen. The government doesn't suddenly become frugal because it doesn't have a central bank. Quite the contrary. It can print as much as it wants. It's incentivized to do so, and it will. It will. So there isn't, in terms of danger to the public, there isn't really, it's not really better to have the government simply issuing currency. And the kind of reason that they still support it is they have some fears about a gold standard. Now, if the gold standard is like the kind we had after 1933, then their fears are basically somewhat justified. Now, the way that they say it is there's a conspiracy theory here, perhaps a valid one, I don't know, that most of the world's gold is held by a few people, probably the Rothschilds, if you ask most people. Some people would say the Fed, perhaps the Rockefellers, maybe the Queen, maybe some German bankers or something. And that if we switched to a gold standard, these people would be the de facto rulers of the world. One, as far as these people are concerned, those rich families are already the de facto rulers of the world, and there's no reason to assume that a government would somehow be independent of them. Second, it only look possessing money, possessing gold is no boon in and of itself. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that there is a situation where all the gold is held by one person. Let's say me. All the world's gold is held by me. That does not mean that I will rule the world forever, because I still need to eat, I still need to consume things, and what am I going to do to do that? I'm going to spend my gold. I'm going to give my gold to farmers, or people who make furniture, or people who build houses, or whatever other services I want. And as soon as I give them my gold, it's no longer, I no longer have a monopoly on it. They hold it, they have the physical metal, and they can circulate it and use it as they see fit. And so I don't have control over it. And the thing is these extremely rich families that we keep hearing about, they don't really produce anything on their own. They have great wealth because the government protects them, and they don't necessarily receive tax money, but if they were simply left on their own, their great wealth would erode away. They would spend it. That's true with any hoard of money, actually. No hoard of money will last forever. It is guaranteed to eventually fall into other hands. It's possible that one person might be so smart that over their entire lifetime they always gain. However, once they die, whoever inherits their money, whether it be a corporate entity or another person, then that person would also have to have a perfect outcompete everybody to maintain that same gold hoard, and that's simply not very likely to happen, especially since usually the children of extremely rich people tend to be way underachieving relative to their parents, and so to assume that they would always win is silly. But where I think this is valid is if you have some kind of government managed gold standard, not a true gold standard, but a standard where maybe government simply issues notes that are, quote, backed by gold, but they don't have any redemption, and they have total control over the value thereof. Then it's conceivable that it could be manipulated. However, a large part, perhaps a majority now, of the people who advocate, quote unquote, a gold standard really favor market money. They want people to be free, and if people are free, they are not going to choose to use a currency that is exploitative. So if we had a free market in money, and there was some evil, secret, satanic family that owned all the gold and would only spend it in a way, would only exchange it with strings attached that would basically enslave anybody who used it, nobody would voluntarily use that currency. If I had all the gold and I said, I will pay you in gold, but the condition is you have to sign that you are my serf forever, and you have to do whatever I say, then nobody would voluntarily use my gold, and they would just say, you know what, I think I'm going to use something else. It could be tobacco, it could be silver, it could be whatever, lead, copper, marijuana, anything. And that's what a free market allows for. And also with a free market, I wouldn't be able to maintain my gold hoard. So it is a good documentary. If you don't know anything about economics, well, if you want to get a really good view on the Fed that has all the conspiracy theories but sound economics, I would highly recommend the book The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. It's very well researched. It's an excellent read. I've given it to total novices. They learned a lot. And if you really are into the conspiracy theory stuff, that's there as well. But it has the good economics in there, where he explicitly says just allowing the government to print on its own would be no help at all. So check it out. If you have seen this documentary and you think that the government should print money, I highly recommend you read that book and read anything by the Austrians. So I don't know. That's it.